Hello and welcome to Wilson Center Now, a production of the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars. I'm John Molesky. Our guest today is writer-producer Craig Mazin. Among Craig's credits is the critically acclaimed HBO series Chernobyl, for which Craig has served as executive producer, creator, and writer. And he is at a Kennan Institute-sponsored event today where above us, one floor above us, people are screening episode 1 of this amazing series. I got to watch it earlier today, and I can tell you myself, it is riveting television, and we'll get into that more in a minute. Craig, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, John. It's great to be here.
So I looked at the Rotten Tomatoes score, either the,
Sure.
the benefit or the dread of all filmmakers and
Yeah.
TV makers.
Yeah.
96% with critics, 98% with viewers.
Yeah.
You're like Avengers Endgame. You don't see scores like that.
No, I've certainly never seen scores like that. I mean, my entire career up to this point has been in comedy. They're a little harder on comedies. I've always been destroyed by Rotten Tomatoes.
Do you read reviews?
Well, I shouldn't. I've been told not to.
Yeah.
It's not helpful. The God's honest truth is it's not helpful
Right. That makes sense.
to doing what we do.
Now, I'm going to take the liberty of reading a few to you, but I think
Fair enough.
Chernobyl does what the best stories do. It details events with a specific time and place, while also revealing deeper truth that extends well beyond the bounds of a single narrative. Craig Mazin's exceptional series will cement itself as a deeply personal and poignantly crafted piece of art that not only serves as a historical reminder, but as a warning to those willing to pay the price of cutting corners on a world stage. The way Mazin distills the complexity of the situation into potent dialogue is a marvel. And here's my favorite of these review samples, one of the best series in the history of television. It was stunning.
Yeah, can you read them again? That was really nice listening to that. I enjoyed that. Yeah,
well, well deserved.
That's great to hear. I particularly like the bit about the warning because there's no question that that's a big part of what this show's about.
Well, you mentioned your history in comedy, and it's I know you've heard this question a million times, but when you look at your resume and your IMDb list,
Right.
You're not the first person you think of for a series on Chernobyl.
Right.
But I've read an interview with you where you're making a really interesting point about it's easier to go from comedy to drama than in reverse. Can you explain that?
Well, first of all, comedy's harder.
Yeah.
There's just no question.
Just to get it right.
Yeah. I mean, comedy is incredibly specific. It's much harder. It's judged almost in a binary fashion. It's funny or it's not. Whereas drama is, oh, I loved it. I liked it. It was, it's more of a sliding scale. Also, comedy ultimately relies on a pretty insightful look into the human psyche, into the way cultural norms work, transgression. There's a lot of gears going on underneath the machinery of what seems to be just a stupid show or movie. Now, I don't see many people going from drama to comedy, but I have seen people go from comedy to drama repeatedly, and some of our best actors, like Tom Hanks, Charlie Kaufman, one of our best filmmakers, was a writer on the Dana Carvey sketch show. This is not uncommon. It just took me a little bit longer, I think, than some of the other people.
So beginning your career focused on comedy, was that more of an accident?
Well, no. I mean, I did love comedy, and one of the things about Hollywood is they will essentially tell you what you do that is meaningful to them. Meaningful meaning exploitatable.
Yes.
So for me, writing comedy and comedy features was something that was very useful to them. So they just kept saying, do more of that.
It makes complete sense what you say. There's so much intelligence behind what seems like simple comedy. Jerry Seinfeld speaks eloquently about how difficult comedy is and how
Yes.
much refinement it takes over time. So you were 15 when the Chernobyl accident occurred in 86?
Yes, I just turned 15.
Was it on your radar at the time?
Yeah, it was. It wasn't much more than a sense that something very dangerous had happened in the Soviet Union. I don't even think there was a distinction, for me at least, that it was in Ukraine as opposed to in Russia, which even today people get confused about. But I do remember it resonating somewhat because it was almost exactly 3 months after the Challenger explosion. And there was a sense that we had suffered this kind of national humiliation and sorrow. This was a symbol of our might brought low. And then, lo and behold, all the way over there on the other side of the world, our mortal enemies, the Soviets, were experiencing the same thing. And I actually remember a general sense of empathy, like, oh, it's happening to them too.
So fast forwarding to the project, how does it come about? How do you pitch the idea, and how long does it take to get it to the screen?
Well, the pitching of it was pretty simple. I went to go see Carolyn Strauss, who is one of the executive producers of Game of Thrones. She's a brilliant producer and a friend, and I just said, this is something I want to do. I want to do it at HBO. Do you think they would be interested? And she said, yeah, well, let's go find out. So we went over to HBO. And I basically, I said, this is the story I want to tell.
How long had you been developing it to that point?
Not long. I mean, maybe 6 months or so, I had just been researching and reading. And I had a general sense of how I wanted to tell the story and also what the story was and what it wasn't. Because I think the natural thing is to think, okay, this is a story about an explosion. Well, I'm going to get that out of the way in minute 3. Or this is a story about nuclear power. Not at all. Or this is a story about the evils of the Soviet Union. Absolutely not. This is a story about people and their failures and their successes. This is a story about human cowardice and human lying, but also this bravery and the sacrificial spirit. And whatever I said to them, they said, well, that's worth taking a shot. Go ahead and write a script. And from there, it worked out.
So your process, I've read a piece, I think, that Vox did with you, staggeringly accurate, and talked about your obsession with accuracy. Do you feel extra pressure when you're not only doing a historical piece, but something that's relatively recent history?
Yeah. Oh, no, enormous amount of pressure. Yeah. The pressure for me wasn't so much about meeting the standards of certain nitpickers. The pressure was about getting the story right for people who lived it. People who lived through it or who are related to people who lived through it. I was very aware that we were telling a story from another culture. And for me, one of the ways you honor that culture and respect it is by getting the details right. If you can't get the little things right, there is, I think communicates a lack of concern.
Clothing and cars and
clothing, cars, what the trash can looks like, what the license plate is, jewelry, everything, watches, every little thing we tried to do right because we wanted to show that we cared. Yeah. Because we did.
Is this a level of detail, attention to detail you bring to all of your work, or was this sort of an evolution of your process based on this subject matter?
I've never written a nonfiction piece before, so I had to invent whatever my process is. I invented it with Chernobyl. It's now my process. I don't know. I can't imagine doing it another way.
And was it a journalistic process? Did you interview a lot of people, contemporaries, or people on the ground?
It wasn't as thoroughly journalistic as, say, somebody writing a book.
Yeah.
But I did interview quite a few people. I interviewed some people who were there. I interviewed people who grew up in Pripyat. I interviewed people who were nuclear physicists just to learn how the science worked. But mostly I focused those interviews on the cultural experience of living in the Soviet Union and specifically Soviet Ukraine. Yeah.
Did the story evolve as you talked to people? In other words, you went in with an idea of a story you're going to tell, but then you start talking to people. Did it change in any significant ways?
A little bit. Most of the ways that things changed were in the small ways because I learned details and facets of things that I thought would help flesh out the picture and make it feel truer to what it was like. But there were some instances where things became uncomfortable. When I started, for instance, there's a story of these 3 divers that go underneath the reactor. When I started working on the series, it was essentially accepted common knowledge that they died. As I was writing the scripts, very convincing evidence and then overwhelming evidence eventually came about to show that they didn't die, that 2 of them are still alive today. So I had to rethink how I was going to do it.
Did you get to speak to them?
I tried, but they
talking.
People want their privacy, and I respect that.
About that, the whole notion of getting to the truth of a story. We live in the era of designer truth. Bring your own truth. Hashtag fake news, however you want to frame that. Talk about your thoughts on how it relates to this project in that regard. How up against it did you feel in getting to some sort of truth that would be accepted?
Well, I mean, it is the purpose of this entire show. When I considered what happened at Chernobyl and why, it seemed to me that it was a function of lying. And, well, let's go a little bit further. It was a function of the debasement of truth. The value of truth in the Soviet Union had been debased thoroughly. Essentially, it had been eliminated, and in its place was narrative. And the narrative made it so that nobody even really cared so much, I think, about some of the truths that were going on. They just understood that what everyone was doing was following a story. The problem is eventually something's going to go wrong because the truth is still the truth. It doesn't matter what we do. Now, I understood that I was creating a fictional narrative to present a story about the dangers of fictional narrative. And it's one of the reasons why I did this podcast to air alongside the show with Peter Sagal from NPR, where I just said, look, here are the things we changed and why. It was important to be accountable.
You flagged that in the first dialogue of the piece through the narration, the recording of the character. And I wrote it down, and I'm trying to find it. The lessons of Chernobyl, no, and that's not it. The lesson is that lying, arrogance, and supreme. That's your quote.
Right.
Help me out here. I'm trying to figure
well,
out.
at the very beginning.
Okay, if we hear enough lies, we will no longer recognize the truth. What will we do then?
Yes. Very
powerful open.
Yeah, and I think we are, all of us right now, living in a time when we are challenged by this. Because it's not that, look, we know when we hear a blatant lie, and we are hearing a lot of them.
Yes.
And that's in the United Kingdom.
But even people who
everywhere.
hear those choose to believe them if they want to.
If they want to, or they just put them aside because it's okay, it doesn't matter. The dangerous part is that eventually we can't find the truth anymore. It's not that we believe what they're saying, it's that we don't know what we should believe instead. There's just an overwhelming amount of alternatives for you. If you don't believe this, maybe you believe this, maybe you believe this, and everybody can challenge everything. You start to lose contact with the ground, and then dangerous things can happen.
Yeah, I just even wonder if you're talking about it as a cautionary tale of what could happen. I wonder if we're already there in some ways. One of the things I do is speak to groups that travel to D.C. from around the country, seniors generally. Yeah. And every week the questions are different, the groups are different, the geographical locations they travel from are different. But one question every group asks is about, how do I find a reliable source of news that I can rely on, that I can believe is actually factual?
Well, the truth is it takes work. See, we don't want to work. We want a source. We want Walter Cronkite to come back. But Walter Cronkite was also just a man.
Yes.
And so everything can get funneled through a Murrow or a Cronkite, but that's actually not the truth. The truth requires work. It requires reading, and it also requires a critical thinking mind that is less interested in an organized philosophy that fits along somebody's prescription of how you should think, and is really more about what you think based on the evidence.
Is that I heard it from an old reporter once talking about Watergate, saying in cases like this there is no truth, there's just versions of the truth. Right. Unless it's mathematics.
There are facts. Facts are facts, right? But when we're trying to get to an understanding of them, I think we've become obsessed with replacing fact with interpretation.
Right.
Sometimes facts are good enough. A crime is a crime. Right? Now, you can go through all the interpretations you want, but a crime is a crime, and we're starting to lose sight of that.
Mm-hmm. So, any deleted scenes, either literal or figurative, things that you wanted to put in there, but just there wasn't time?
Yeah, there were a few. Some of it was for time. There's one little side story about one of the men who worked at the power plants, the second in command, Nikolai Fomin, actually in the wake of the disaster attempted suicide. And eventually had to go into an institution, and we did show that. And ultimately, it seemed like we were maybe wandering a little bit too far down the path of a sort of personal melodrama there, and it didn't quite feel. I was a little worried that we were kind of exploiting something that happened to a real person. And then, interestingly, in episode 4, there's a storyline about liquidators. These are the men who were conscripted to clean up the zone. And their job was to eliminate the pets. All these pets had been left behind. They were contaminated. They need to be destroyed. And it's a very hard sequence to watch. It's difficult. And it's amazing. We can process people being killed on screen. We have real trouble with animals being killed on screen. And that one, there was a scene that we thought, that's just too much. We get it. Let's stop here.
It's torturing.
Yeah, let's not torture them.
And a point we should make for viewers is that the characters in your piece are real people.
By and large.
Yes.
So Jared Harris is playing Valery Legasov, who was a Soviet academician put in charge of the cleanup, and Stellan Skarsgard is playing Boris Sherbina, who was a deputy minister. Emily Watson is playing a composite character. She represents, because there were dozens of scientists that were kind of moving in and out, and you can't show 12 people, so we kind of compressed into one there.
You said your formula has been now newly minted as a result of this project. What is the formula for how much you adhere to strict historic fact and how much you allow yourself artistic license?
Sure. My basic philosophy on Chernobyl, at the very least, was go with the facts until you butt up against a point where you're not able to tell the story. If you can't tell the story, or if you have to tell it in such a way that no one will watch, then the facts don't matter because they won't be able to see them. So always go for the facts. Changes are only so that you can tell the story at all, never to make it more dramatic, never to make it more interesting. The interesting and dramatic stuff is in the little details, I think.
Have you been a writer all your life?
Well, I've been a professional writer for over 25 years.
I don't mean that.
As a kid.
Is it something that you were
I've been a
driven to do from an early
daydreamer
age?
my whole life.
Uh-huh.
I've been a
Decided to
daydreamer.
put the daydreams to paper.
Well, daydreaming lends itself to screenwriting, I
Sure.
think, because you're imagining scenes in your head. I think novelists probably have a slightly different mental process.
But a lot of people have that, but then they don't have the discipline to take those daydreams and turn them into something.
Yeah, well, I'm
Where did
a
that come
pretty
from?
disciplined guy. I don't know. I must have been yelled at a lot as a kid.
Now, this is a different type of production for you.
Yeah.
And so it puts you in different places as far as interviews like this, right?
Sure.
If you're doing Hangover 3, it's it's Entertainment Weekly. Or
Oddly,
something
they
like
did
that.
not have me at the Wilson Center for
There
that.
you go.
Yeah.
So what is that experience like for you? Is this
it's been
part
fun.
of the fun, the promotion, or is it torture? Or
No,
what is it?
I mean, the torture is only, I think, there's a 2 or 3 week period where you are going on a hamster wheel of interviews, and it can get a little exhausting. It's not normal or natural to talk about yourself and what you do in this kind of concentrated way. But I will say that coming to places like this and some of the opportunities I've had as a result of this show have been satisfying to the adult me, because I am an adult. I'm 48 years old, and
this is consequential stuff.
It is, or at least it appears to be for the audience, which I think is amazing. And so, yeah, of course, the grown-up in me is having kind of a great time, actually, with this.
And you've encountered, as always we do, some unintended consequences. I saw your tweet about encouraging people to be responsible because one of the unintended consequences is more tourism
Right.
on the site of the accident.
And by the way, more tourism is great because it's great for the economy over there. It's, Ukraine is still coming on up in terms of its economy, and for instance, the people that gave us our tour through Pripyat they had grown up in Pripyat. So they're local, and this is part of their economy, and I think that's wonderful. Obviously, you want to be respectful of a place where people died, and you want to be respectful of a place where people used to live and can live no longer. On the day we were there, it was one of the days where they open it up, and it's a lot easier for people to go through. It's essentially, if you used to live here, you can come back and visit your home. And then at the end of the day, you leave again. And looking at those people is a reminder of how it affected so many human beings. I don't mean to be a scold. Of course you can smile and, joke around if you want, but just keep it in mind as you go there.
Sacred ground in many ways.
In many ways it is.
I've talked to a lot of writers who express a certain frustration that what they write in the script doesn't make it onto the screen. Now, you have the advantage of being an executive producer and a creator on this.
Yeah.
What's the difference between writing for someone where you don't know what's going to end up in front of people's eyes or writing in this way?
It's all the difference in the world. I mean, this is the only thing I've ever written after all these years where I was involved to the extent that I would always want to be involved, and that I had creative authority, and I was able to say, look, this is what we're going to do. That said, part of having creative authority is listening and letting other people's genius and brilliance, come in. Johan Rank, our director, did an incredible job. And most of the time he would do these things and I would just say, well, I would have never thought of that, but that's why you're here. Sometimes he would come to me and we would have these moments together where he'd say, listen, I know there was this scene with, I won't give it away here, but somebody is brought into a room to be questioned. Mm-hmm. And it was supposed to look like this, but I found this place that looks so cool. It's this old abandoned industrial kitchen. Do you think we could do it in there? And I said, maybe. Is there a drain on the ground of that thing? Yes, good, because that's a terrifying thing, to be put in a room and see a drain on the floor. I'm scared. And we would find these moments together when we're talking about what people are wearing and where we're shooting. But yeah, it was as I wanted it to be. And I think that was incredibly gratifying.
Talk to us a bit about the kind of creative freedom that HBO provides in a situation like this, where you probably could have done 6 episodes if you wanted, right? Or 4. Mm-hmm. You were able to tell the story in the way that the story evolved on its own.
In fact, it was supposed to be 6. I pitched them 6 episodes.
It was 6, okay.
And while I was writing episode 2, I thought, I think this episode would be great if I just shoved 2 and 3 together and made it one episode. I'm not a big fan of the kind of series
Drag
that,
it out.
yeah, because they
Drag it
can.
out. Yeah.
HBO and Sky both were incredible. They were just supportive completely. I know in these interviews it's a little cliche to say, oh, they were so wonderful, but they really were.
Sometimes it's true.
They
right?
really were. I mean, look, I zero complaints. They were great and smart and supportive.
Allow me one more sausage-making question.
Sure.
I'm fascinated by the whole process of writing. How much over the years have you written that still sits in a drawer or a file somewhere that never made it to the screen? What percentage of what you write actually becomes a movie, a television program?
Sure. I mean, I'm actually a pretty high percentage in the sense that a lot of the things that I've written have been things that the studio said, listen, we want to make this.
Does that make you the exception to the rule?
Yes. Yes. I think anybody earning a living as a screenwriter in Hollywood is the exception to the rule, unfortunately. It's a really tough business to get into, and it's a tough business to stay into. But I will say that of the movies I've written, the 2 best scripts I've ever written, 3 best scripts I've ever written are unmade and probably will remain so.
Huh. Well, are we allowed to ask what's next, or is that a secret?
All I can say, it is a secret, but all I can say is it is with HBO again, and it's going to be based on truth and history, but it will be far more recent history, and it will be far more close to home.
Well, intriguing. But let's bask in the glory of this a little longer. Really, Craig, it's a terrific production. I can't wait to see the finale. But what I've seen is the most riveting TV I've seen in a long time.
Thank you, John.
Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure. Thanks.
Thank you as well. Hope you enjoyed this edition of Wilson Center Now, and you'll join us again for another episode soon. Thanks for watching.